What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So admittedly, I didn't really have any intention of covering Suicide Squad Rebirth. We did Justice League versus Suicide Squad, but that was about it. That was really just because I felt like that story was amazing. But I was talking to Benny over at Comic Store and he was like, dude, you have to read Suicide Squad Rebirth. So I started reading the comic and it is pretty stellar. So we're a little behind the times here. We're gonna like hammer out the Suicide Squad because this is actually pretty stellar. But one thing to remember, for those of you guys who are new to DC Comics, the Suicide Squad is exactly what it sounds like. I mean, ever since their original introduction back in Brave and the Bold, God, number 59 or something like that, back in the 1950s, when it was really just, like Team X. I mean, I guess they were kind of the Suicide Squad, but not really. Over the course of their publication history, the group was basically expanded to the point that they were literally a team that would be sent out for the purpose of achieving a mission, and if any of them died in the process, they would just be replaced by others. And so what the Suicide Squad turned into over the course of its publication history was a veritable who's who of the DC universe in terms of characters that fans would normally never have exposure to. It's very similar to like the Justice League International team after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Instead of the traditional Justice League team, we just basically got a team of like Guy Gardner, the Green Lantern, and Blue Beetle, and Booster Gold, all led by Batman, and there were a host of other people who popped in and popped out, but it was a way to expose fans to characters that they would normally never see. Now, for the most part, it was just kind of killing those characters off, so it was a way to just sort of remove them, so it was almost like a last stop for characters that weren't doing well, but individuals like Harley Quinn were added in to basically bolster the roster of the Suicide Squad. Now, remember, the Suicide Squad, as it was led in DC's New 52 and continues on in DC Rebirth, is Amanda Waller essentially running the whole show. And Amanda Waller, much like you saw in the Suicide Squad movie, is pretty cutthroat. Like, she's pretty ruthless. And that's one of the funny things here, because we had talked about the whole idea of Amanda Waller when we did our videos on Justice League versus Suicide Squad. But Amanda Waller, as she appeared in the New 52 initial run, was starkly different from the Amanda Waller that fans remembered before the New 52 relaunch in 2011. The earliest New 52 version was very, former military, that kind of a thing. This version of Amanda Waller is the classic Amanda Waller, which is to say, if you ever watched Justice League, the animated series, it's basically that version that you recall from that series. She's cold, she's ruthless, she doesn't really care about the villains that are being used in order to achieve these goals. Now again, bombs are basically planted in the minds of these villains in order to keep them in check, to keep them from just running off the reservation or anything like that. But for the most part, because of the fact that this comic coincided around the release of the Suicide Squad film, the roster is almost identical in the sense that you've got Deadshot, you got Killer Croc, you have Enchantress, Captain Boomerang, Katana, and Harley Quinn. But the cool thing about this is that this also gives us perspective from Amanda Waller, and where we would look at her and just say she's cold, she's calculating, she doesn't really care. In the end, it all goes towards achieving a greater goal. And that was really always the success behind the Suicide Squad. I mean, in this particular mission, the squad is basically being sent to the furthest corner of the earth to basically capture some cosmic artifact that had effectively crash landed here. And so it's kind of cool because by definition, in every single Suicide Squad story arc, somebody will die. It's not necessarily every issue, it's just every 6 or 7 issues when a story arc starts and finishes, somebody will inevitably be killed. And so what this does is it basically gives us this idea that this place, this black vault more or less, is where the Suicide Squad are traveling to in order to attain this particular item. Now, of course, because of the fact that this is the Suicide Squad, which is basically a government sanctioned team, they're very similar to like Batman in terms of how they operate, or like the Justice League or something along those lines. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that while the Suicide Squad are not really like a superhero based team, they do have contacts and resources all across the world. And that's the way almost every single one of these groups and every single one of these teams functions when it comes to DC Comics. Batman, for example, will allow some criminals to escape in order to catch bigger criminals later on, and then he'll use fear to basically gain the information that he needs. He'll let a small-time crook escape so that he can get information out of that small-time crook about like what Two-Face is doing or what the Penguin is doing or something along those lines. It's really just kind of like let the little fish go to catch the big fish later. The Suicide Squad is much the same way. The difference here is that with them being government sanctioned and with the government of the United States working alongside other government intelligence teams and groups and so on and so forth, they have a contact inside this prison. And this contact is basically going to guide them, or at the very least give them the information they need or help them achieve their goal. And that's usually how the Suicide Squad works for the most part. I mean, sometimes the story's just going in and just ripping things up. I mean, once they get inside this facility, they're just absolutely crushing everything that they come across. But then they run into a girl named Hack. And this is kind of a funny scenario because Hack actually idolizes and models herself after Harley Quinn. And that's why these little stories and these little segments are always so interesting, because it creates this much broader picture. And it really was something that we didn't see a lot of in the New 52. And that's one of the small things that sort of adds to the bigger landscape. And that's what individual writers do in these, really a lot of the Rebirth stories. They interject these small things. Now, the cool thing about this is that what it does is it actually speeds up the story a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why this is so beneficial. And it's actually pretty good use of the character Hack. She's very similar to a teleporter. The difference here is that so long as she is in a location that has access to the digital space, she can transport from one location to another. Now, once they actually access this black vault, they end up discovering that what they're searching for is this cosmic device that is simply just a giant magic sphere, or at least just a giant sphere that's being referred to as a portal to the Phantom Zone. Now, this is kind of a big deal. This was really the introduction of General Zod into DC Rebirth. The problem with this is that if you have been reading DC Comics since the beginning of New 52 all the way up until right now, there's a little bit of an issue that takes place here. What we did is when we got around to the release of Wonder Woman here on my channel, we started covering some of the stories regarding Wonder Woman and Superman. And one of the first story arcs that we covered was the arrival of General Zod and his Lieutenant Feora. The problem with this is that in that story, they were effectively defeated and then they were locked away in the Phantom Zone, or at least it seemed to be that way, but there's no dots connecting how we got from the end of that story to the beginning of this story. And so what we're kind of left to do here is just use our own devices. Maybe that whole, Superman, Wonder Woman story just never really happened in the first place. We kind of just cast that aside and just say, at some point along the line, General Zod was locked into the Phantom Zone and he's just now escaping. And so again, the Phantom Zone is essentially this prison of sorts used, or really kind of originating on Krypton. And the idea was that with Krypton being so technologically advanced, execution wasn't really the way they functioned. Instead, they would just kind of whisk people away to this dimension that would stretch on for infinity, and it would just serve as a prison of sorts. And the reason why they would do this is because of the fact that at any point in time, anybody's actions could be exonerated, and they in turn could be freed from the Phantom Zone and allowed to go back among their normal lives. At the same time, it also allowed for DC to basically bring back villains, especially when it came to characters like General Zod. With General Zod being one of the most notable villains of Superman, it allowed for DC to basically have Superman defeat Zod and then send him off to the Phantom Zone so that DC could bring Zod back any point along the line. And this was designed to kind of be this counter argument in a lot of ways to what happened with the death of Superman. With regards to a really good video that Max Landis did, where, it was called The Death and Return of Superman, the death and return of Superman by definition killed death in comics. It basically set things up so that anybody could die and come back anywhere along the line. And that's the reason why if you go and you look at the timeline of comic books in terms of characters who died and stayed dead versus characters who died and returned, there was this huge explosion of superhero resurrections following the death of Superman, because now it was an established fact anybody could come back at any point along the line. And what that did is it basically created a circumstance where it took away from the idea of death's importance in comics. Colossus, for example, died during the finale of the Legacy virus, injecting himself with a cure and then basically saving mutant kind. He was resurrected as part of Joss Whedon's first run, an Astonishing X-Men called Gifted. And of course, we have that video down in the description, assuming that you're interested in something like that. But that was the whole idea here. The introduction of the Phantom Zone, despite the fact that it had long predated the death of Superman, served as a way for DC to sort of grab these Kryptonian elements, grab these aspects of the Superman mythos, and then just kind of roll it in, and instead of killing people, banish them to the Phantom Zone so that they could be brought back at any point along the line. So again, it was really kind of a reshuffling. But with this being the first volume of Suicide Squad Rebirth, it's really just designed to kind of introduce us to a lot of the characters in terms of what they're capable of. But because of the fact that this team is basically a copy of the team from the movie, there's not a whole lot of expansion here. But in case you didn't see it, Enchantress is basically a character that delves in magic and so on and so forth, but she is a spirit that effectively inhabits the body of a woman by the name of June Moon. And much like the Bruce Banner Incredible Hulk dichotomy, Enchantress will manifest, usually at the point when she's needed, and then she'll basically just start using her magics and sorcery for a wide array of different effects: teleportation, telekinesis, telepathy, virtually making her one of the most powerful beings in DC Comics. But again, she's not present 100% of the time. And even then, there's also this idea that June Moon cannot control when Enchantress comes out. It's just Enchantress is here now. And so again, it creates kind of an interesting situation. When it comes to Harley Quinn, that speaks for itself. I almost kind of feel like it'd be redundant to talk about Harley Quinn, but she very much is the support character of the Suicide Squad, not in the sense that she's in the background, but in the sense that her popularity bolsters the popularity of the Suicide Squad itself. It's the, quintessential example that a rising tide lifts all ships. And so we also end up having Deadshot, of course, a guy who's basically perfectly accurate with every scenario, but his situation is actually pretty interesting. When it came to the character of Deadshot, he was a guy who was essentially just, a mercenary. But after seeing Batman engage in, some kind of a battle, was basically inspired to become the sort of soldier of fortune, believing that he could do some good. The problem with this is that there was a criminal organization called Cobra that basically took his daughter captive. And of course, the idea of Deadshot was to always keep his daughter away from the life that he lived in order to ensure that one, she never knew what he was about, and two, she would never become corrupted, quote unquote, by the life that he lived. The issue with this is that Cobra actually kidnapped his daughter for the basis of forcing Deadshot to kill Bruce Wayne. Now, ultimately, this leads into Deadshot striking a deal with Bruce Wayne, alerting him of what's going on. The two of them team up, they defeat Cobra, and they basically rescue Deadshot's daughter, but in the ensuing conflict, Deadshot kills members of Cobra, which leads to him having to be arrested, and Batman basically taking him away for his crimes and, serving in prison, leading to him being rolled into the Suicide Squad. But again, it's kind of a cool situation. Katana having this magical sword with the souls of people that it's killed and absorbed confined within. What the Suicide Squad is designed to do is to be this amalgamation of different characters with different abilities, all of whom complement or sometimes even just kind of like ruin the team. For example, Captain Boomerang is totally incinerated by General Zod, but he's also one of the weakest members of the team that really can't contribute much. He could throw razor sharp boomerangs, but what are they going to do against a guy that can't be harmed by bullets? But the idea of General Zod being here and facing off against the Suicide Squad creates an almost hopeless situation. They're dealing with a crazed Superman. If given enough time, General Zod's powers begin to manifest, his heat vision begins to manifest, different things like that, and they're basically dealing with Superman if he lost his mind and went absolutely insane and was also a bad guy. And so again, at this point, they're just trying to rally their forces. Hack is trying to download as much information as she can on the nature of the Phantom Zone, this Phantom Zone orb. Harley Quinn, of course, shows up, alongside Rick Flag with all different kinds of weapons and armament, different things like that, only for the entire Suicide Squad to be met with the arrival of the Annihilation Brigade. Now, as far as I'm aware, and I've been doing some research on this, the Annihilation Brigade is basically a new concept in DC Rebirth. They've only been introduced as part of this story. Now, I could be wrong, but I've poked around and I've not been able to find hide nor hair. So maybe I'm looking in the wrong places. I have no idea. But the fact remains, the Annihilation Brigade is really just designed to, again, create this very stretched situation. And the reason why this happens is because the Suicide Squad fits in perfect with the very notion of a team that's pushed to the brink. And the stories are always done, so the question is always, is somebody going to die this time? And if they are, why? And how far is the Suicide Squad going to be pushed? Because it would be a little bit lackluster if the Suicide Squad breaks into this prison and then Captain Boomerang gets shot in the face by a guard. That's not interesting. But seeing the team stretched in two different directions. On one side, they have to fight General Zod. On the other side, they have to fight the Annihilation Brigade, who are basically the guards of this prison, keeping people from escaping and keeping people from getting in, and then capturing those who end up making their way in. But it's also the reaction of Amanda Waller. And that's one of the coolest things here, is because when General Zod first appeared, when he first escaped the Phantom Zone, Amanda Waller was like, if you guys are talking about General Zod, you guys need to get out of there. And that's kind of the cool thing, is because while Amanda Waller is like, grab the information and let's go, she also recognizes the threat of General Zod. Because remember, Amanda Waller's not saying you guys need to get out of there because she cares about the Suicide Squad. She's telling them to get out of there because she wants the information that they have. And a dead team is not going to be able to give her the information that she needs. And so the idea is grab the info, get out of there, and then whatever happens with General Zod happens with General Zod. And that's kind of the cool thing here, is because Zod is more than capable of obliterating the entirety of the team. Now, the orb as it exists as part of the Phantom Zone has a will of its own, or at least that seems to be the case, in the sense that it reaches back out for General Zod and tries to pull him back in. Now, of course, the Suicide Squad is able to force him back in there, and Hack is able to teleport them away and send them back to Belle Reve. But what this does is it basically brings in the notion that this Phantom Zone orb is taken by, Hack as she teleports the Suicide Squad away. And so it introduces the idea, is the Suicide Squad going to induct General Zod onto their ranks? And so again, it creates kind of a cool scenario, because it's one of these things where the plot thickens and the story continues to expand. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.